Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Groucho Marx once said, before I speak, I've got something important to say. That is that the contents that I'm about to go through in my presentation are mine alone and not those of Ernst & Young. And I think it's important for me to say that because I'm sure some of you are wondering whether Ernst & Young has changed its branding recently. But I thought we would go with this motif, just given the nature of the topic here. I also want to say, in the interest of full disclosure, that I was one of the discussants at Dr. Gray and Dr. No's previous presentation here in 2011. That's the benchmark study that's being used for this. So if any of you want to see my comments on that, you can actually watch the video on the symposium website. And somebody told me actually before that it's currently trending on Twitter, so I must have been doing a really good job on it. So here we are Friday afternoon at 5:30, and let me see if I can try to amuse you. So what I'd like to do is focus on three basic questions. If you could advance the slide, please, Ephraim. I asked myself three fundamental questions with respect to this research study. And the first is, to what extent is the subject matter significant to a public practitioner like myself? So, actually, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Henry Grunberg. I'm a partner at Ernst & Young in Toronto. And in the course of my various responsibilities, I do work with a lot of internal audit functions, and I do work as an internal auditor for those clients that have chosen to outsource some or all of their internal audit activities to E&Y. So this subject certainly is of interest to me. That's why I asked the question in that way. And then the second question is, what is the value of the research itself, somebody like myself? And then finally, what comments do I have on the research method? Now, I'm actually not going to focus as much on that third comment because I did have the good fortune of reviewing Professor Murphy's excellent paper before this session, and he actually covered off a lot of the topics that I wanted to mention. And with only one exception, I agreed with everything he said. I will get to that exception to the end of the talk. So if you can move on to the next slide, Ephraim. Let me start with the significance of the subject matter. And to me, it's a very basic equation that seems to make sense to me. Companies are valued in many cases, in practically all cases, based on the value of their brand. The brand is enhanced by their reputation, and certainly these days, having sound environmental and green IT reporting practices contribute to reputation, which contributes to brand, which contributes to shareholder value. So we all get it. Having a sound environmental brand or reputation is a good thing for most organizations. And I also get the concept of green IT being an important component of having a good environmental sustainability record. You know, most companies that operate data centers recognize that data centers consume massive amounts of electricity, and that creates an environmental footprint. And then there's the equipment itself, disposal of it, and so forth. So certainly green IT is an important and probably a growing component of an organization's environmental footprint. Therefore, from my perspective, the answer to the first question is that this is a significant area of interest to me as a practitioner, and I would love to see whatever research is associated with it. So the next slide really talks to, is this an area that's relevant to internal audit? And here's maybe where I'll answer your question today. I think from what I've seen with internal audit functions, many will not have necessarily the skill sets to deal with this issue at an acceptable or an appropriate level of depth. However, for those organizations where this is important enough, they will find the resources. They'll either contract them or they'll bring somebody in from another area of the organization who knows something about it. They'll do something to address this issue if they believe it to be important enough. So that's really the answer, I would say, to the question. And, you know, more generally, is there an internal audit angle to green IT? Well, for the reason that I put down on this slide, I think I think there is. I think most organizations in my experience do not have a great corporate vision when it comes to green IT. There isn't very much executive support or strategy. Many of them have poor asset management capabilities, and they have limited human or financial resources to deal with a lot of issues associated with green IT, including, and I don't know how well you can see it here, but things like low server utilization or dead servers, or badly configured data centers, inefficiently run data centers, aging equipment, and so forth. These are all areas that are ripe for internal audit to come in, take a look at, assess, and write a report on. So I do see a very obvious angle or method or means by which internal audit can come in and add value to the whole area of green IT. So just in the interest of time, because it's Friday afternoon, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind just flipping a few slides ahead. The next slides, which are available in the presentation, really just belabor that point, so I don't think it's necessary to go into them here. And if you can turn to the slide, one more. Perfect. So this is the objective that's stated in the research paper. And now on to my second question, which is the so what question. Does the research as performed by Dr. Gray et al., does that actually provide you with tangible value? And to answer that question, I want to read the specific objective of the paper. The objective of the paper is to explore whether internal auditors' involvement in green IT is different in Australia compared to the United States and Canada. I have to say, to be quite honest, I find that objective for an academic paper to be somewhat on the narrow side, and this is actually why I disagree with you. I would not have stated the objective in those terms because there's not really much that I can do with that as a practitioner. And there's actually better questions in the paper itself that are sort of baked in or weaved in throughout the content that I'd just like to read to you and tell you why I think that they would actually be better objectives for me. So to me, I would love for this question to have read, does the degree of environmental regulation in a country impact the nature and extent of internal involvement with green IT? Does a country's overall attitudes toward environmentalism impact the nature and extent of internal audit involvement with green IT? Does an internal audit function's preoccupation with Sarbanes-Oxley detract from its ability to allocate resources to other important areas such as green IT? And finally, does internal audit's work program, its list of projects for any given year, tie to what its enterprise risk management listing says are the critical risks facing that organization as it pertains to green IT? In other words, is green IT a specifically identified enterprise risk, which quite often then drives what the internal audit is doing? So questions focused on those objectives would make the research much more usable, much more valuable as a tool that I can use with my clients. And those questions are actually in there, and one can extrapolate the answers to those questions. But I suspect that if the objective had been stated in any one of those terms, the research that followed itself would actually be a little bit different than the research that was conducted. So that's my feedback on the overall usefulness, if you will, of the research. So just to kind of sum it up, I think the subject matter was a little bit too narrow for me. Could advance to the next slide, please. Maybe just a few additional comments. Back there. Anyway, what I was going to say was the decision to use Australia as the test case. So I can see why you would choose Australia, and the paper actually provides sound arguments as to why Australia would be a good choice. The paper also provides sound arguments as to why Australia would not be a good choice. In my view, as I weigh the different arguments in the paper, I did not necessarily think Australia was the best choice. I would have preferred to see a country where it doesn't come from the same common roots as we suggested as we have in Canada and the United States, maybe a Scandinavian country, maybe the Netherlands, maybe some other country around the world that approaches green IT in a different way. That would be an interesting contrast to me to see how are other countries doing it. To say that we looked at Australia and we concluded that they're the same as Canada and the United States, yeah, okay, I understand that has certain value, but I might have been able to presuppose that from the outset. So it's a little bit more limited in terms of the value that it provides to me. And now we'll go to the final comment, final slide. You can make that one, please. So these were the 4 hypotheses, and given all my other comments, I just wanted to add one other thing to the hypothesis here, since I did mention that I was discussing at the 2011 symposium on the original green IT. So that research was done, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was done around 2010, 2011. This research was done 2014 or thereabouts. So we've actually got data points at 2 different points in time, which, from my perspective, is a methodological issue that needs to be taken into account. I don't know, maybe things have changed over 4 years in either Australia or Canada and the United States. In any case, you're not comparing apples to apples. I think my gut feel is, based on what I know in dealing with colleagues in Australia and so forth, that probably the results are still valid. But even still, if you're going to do a comparative analysis, I think, kind of as a fundamental basic, the data points should be at the same point in time. So that would be my comment on that. And then, again, I kind of agree with much of what Professor Murphy has said. Using a convenience sample from the world that I come in, where we're heavy on statistical sampling and random sampling and so forth, sending out a kind of a blind survey to thousands of people and getting back, a sprinkling of responses, about 1% response, does not necessarily provide you with the true picture that you're aiming to get. Something a little bit more haphazard or random would have been a better approach from my perspective. And my final comment before I wrap it up and let everybody go to drinks, I was thinking a little bit, because the paper is very well written, it's very well researched, and it's very thought-provoking. And I thought to myself, how is this the case? And again, if you go back and watch the 2011 video, I was questioning even back then, why is it that internal auditors are all saying, yeah, we've got to be doing this, but they're not? Why is that? And I don't know, I didn't really come up with any good answers other than ultimately it's not a priority. We always say, yeah, this is great stuff, we should be doing it, but there's other priorities that get in the way. So what is being prioritized ahead of green IT? And the other thing that I was thinking about was outsourcing. Sure, a lot of companies have heavy-duty horsepower, big applications, and so forth, but increasingly, many organizations are actually outsourcing their data centers to other organizations. They're using cloud computing. So even though they generate an enormous environmental footprint, they do not control that footprint in any meaningful way. It's their service provider who controls that footprint. And so therefore, it may actually make sense for an organization that is a heavy-duty IT user, but that outsources to Accenture or IBM or somebody else, they would not be spending their internal audit resources chasing green IT. They would be spending their internal audit resources chasing other projects that are more within their control. So I think that is it. I guess the gong is going to go shortly. And that's